Devotion. As a king is recognized distinctly amidst his army, so realize Brahman as pure consciousness, distinct from all imperfections. Dwell forever in the Atman. Let this manifest world melt away in Brahman. Brahman dwells within the shrine of the heart, the eternal existence, the supreme, the one without a second, standing apart from the gross and subtle aspects of this universe. The man who dwells within this shrine, united with Brahman, is no longer subject to rebirth and death. The truth of Brahman may be understood intellectually, but the ego sense is deep-rooted and powerful, for it has existed from beginningless time. It creates the impression that, I am the actor, I am he who experiences. This impression causes our bondage to rebirth and death. It can be removed only by the earnest effort to live constantly in union with Brahman. The sages define liberation as freedom from all such impressions, and hence from the cravings which are caused by them. It is ignorance that causes our sense of identity with the body, the sense organs, and everything else which is not the Atman. He is a wise man who overcomes this ignorance through devotion to the Atman. Know your true Atman as the witness of the mind and intellect, and of the thought waves that arise in them. Raise one single wave of thought constantly, I am Brahman. Thus you will free yourself from identification with non-Atman. Cease to follow the way of the world, cease to follow the way of the flesh, cease to follow the way of tradition. Get rid of this false identification and know the true Atman. When a man follows the way of the world, the way of tradition, and the way of the flesh, knowledge of the reality is not born within him. The wise say that this threefold way is like an iron chain binding the feet of the man who tries to escape from the prison house of this world. He who frees himself from it attains liberation. When sandalwood is dipped in filthy water, its delicious fragrance may be overpowered by the smell of the filth. But as soon as you rub the sandalwood, the bad odor disappears and the air is filled with heavenly fragrance. The heavenly fragrance of the Atman is overpowered by the foul odor of countless evil desires which are like mud within us. Like sandalwood, its fragrance will fill the air when it has been cleansed by constant rubbing with the thought, I am Brahman. The sweet fragrance of the Atman is overpowered by innumerable cravings for the things of the senses. These cravings can be destroyed by devotion to the Atman, and then the light of the Atman becomes revealed. As the mind gradually becomes devoted to the Atman, it frees itself by degrees from craving for sense objects. When it has rid itself entirely of all craving, the vision of the Atman is no longer obstructed. Through constant devotion to the Atman, the mind's impurities dissolve away. All cravings are obliterated. Strive, therefore, to destroy this illusion. Tamas is overcome by both Rajas and Sattva. Rajas is overcome by Sattva. Sattva is overcome when the pure Atman shines. Therefore, the established in Sattva and strive to destroy this illusion. Be steadfast in your devotion, knowing that the body will certainly continue to live as long as it must. Strive with patience and perseverance to destroy this illusion. Think, I am Brahman, I am not the individual soul, and reject everything that is non-Atman. Strive thus to destroy this illusion which has been created in the past by your craving for sense objects. Learn the truth from the scriptures, reason upon it, and then know, by your own direct experience, that the Atman within you is the Atman in all. Strive thus to destroy this illusion, even to its last traces. The wise man has not the least concern with getting and spending. Therefore strive to destroy this illusion through constant and single-minded devotion to Brahman. Meditate on the truth, that art thou, and realize the identity of the Atman with Brahman. Strive to destroy this illusion and be established in the knowledge that Atman and Brahman are one. With watchfulness and concentration, you must strive to destroy this illusion until all identification of the Atman with this body has completely ceased. Even though you may have reached a stage at which the universe and its creatures appear as dream images, only, no longer seeming real, nevertheless, O prudent one, you must still strive ceaselessly to destroy this illusion. Do not waste a moment in concern for worldly affairs or attraction to sense objects. Remember Brahman even while you are asleep. Meditate upon the Atman within your own heart. False identification. Stop identifying yourself with this corruptible physical body, born of the flesh of father and mother. Regard it as impure, as though it were an outcast. Attain the goal of life by realizing your unity with Brahman. The air in a jar is one with the air everywhere. In like manner, your Atman is one with Brahman. O prudent one, lose all sense of separation and enter into silence. Realize that you are one with the self-luminous Brahman, the ground of all existence. Reject the physical universe and the body, like pots of dirt. The I consciousness is now rooted in the body. Merge this consciousness in the Atman, which is absolute existence, knowledge, and bliss. The consciousness of the subtle body is another limitation. Cast that off, also remain united with the Absolute forever. The mirage of the universe is reflected in Brahman, like a city in a mirror. Know, I am that Brahman, and you will reach the goal of life. The Atman is the reality. It is your true primal self. It is pure consciousness, the one without a second, absolute bliss. It is beyond form and action. Realize your identity with it. Stop identifying yourself with the coverings of ignorance, which are all like the masks assumed by an actor. The universe of appearance is indeed unreal. The sense of ego must also be unreal, since we observe how it comes and goes. But we are conscious also of being the witness, the knower of everything. This consciousness does not belong to the ego sense and the other perceptions which exist only for a moment at a time. The Atman is the witness of the ego and the rest. It is present always, even in deep sleep. The scriptures also declare that the Atman is unborn and undying. It is, therefore, distinct from the gross and the subtle coverings. The Atman must necessarily be changeless and eternal, since it is the knower of all that is changeable. The non-existence of the gross and subtle coverings can be experienced over and over again when we dream or pass into deep sleep. Cease, therefore, to identify yourself with this lump of flesh, the gross body, and with the ego, the subtle covering. Both of them are illusory. Know your Atman, the pure infinite consciousness, externally existent in the past, present, and future. Thus you will find peace. Cease to identify yourself with race, clan, name, form, and walk of life. These belong to the body. The garment of decay. Abandon also the idea that you are the doer of actions or the thinker of thoughts. These belong to the ego, the subtle covering. Realize that you are that being which is eternal happiness. The ego. Man's life of bondage, the world of birth and death, has many causes. The root of them all is the ego, the first begotten child of ignorance. As long as a man identifies himself with this wicked ego, there can be no possibility of liberation, for liberation is its very opposite. Once freed from this eclipsing demon of an ego, man regains his true nature just as the moon shines forth when freed from the darkness of an eclipse. He becomes pure, infinite, eternally blissful, and self-luminous. When a man's mind is overpowered by extreme ignorance, it creates the sense of ego by identifying itself with the coverings. When the ego is completely destroyed, the mind is cleared of the obstacles which obstruct its knowledge of oneness with Brahman. The ego is a strong and deadly serpent, and the gunas are its three angry hoods. It lies coiled around the treasure of the bliss of Brahman, which it guards for its own use. The wise man, inspired by the holy scriptures, cuts off the three hoods with the sword of knowledge and utterly destroys that serpent. Thus he enjoys the treasure of supreme bliss. There is no hope of man's recovery as long as any trace of poison remains in his body. Similarly, the spiritual seeker cannot attain liberation as long as any trace of the ego remains within him. Utterly destroy the ego. Control the many waves of distraction which it raises in the mind. Discern the reality and realize, I am that. You are pure consciousness, the witness of all experiences. Your real nature is joy. Seize this very moment to identify yourself with the ego, the doer, which is created by ignorance. Its intelligence is only apparent, a reflection of the Atman, which is pure consciousness. It robs you of peace and joy in the Atman. By identifying yourself with it, you have fallen into the snare of the world, the miseries of birth, decay, and death. You are the Atman, the infinite being, the pure, unchanging consciousness, which pervades everything. Your nature is bliss, and your glory is without stain. Because you identify yourself with the ego, you are tied to birth and death. Your bondage has no other cause. This ego is your enemy. It is like a thorn stuck in the throat of an eater. Destroy this enemy with the mighty sword of knowledge and be free to enjoy the sovereignty of your own empire, the bliss of the Atman. Check all the activities of the ego and the selfishness they involve. Attain the supreme reality and be free from lust. Dwell in silence and enjoy the bliss of the Atman. Lose all sense of separateness and realize in Brahman your infinite nature. This mighty ego may be cut down to the very roots, but if the mind feeds it, even for a moment, it will come to life again and cause 100 mischiefs. It is like a storm-driven cloud in the rainy season. Conquer this enemy, the ego. Give it no opportunity by letting your thoughts dwell upon sense objects. Such thoughts give it life, as water gives life to a parched citron tree. If you identify yourself with the body, lust will arise in you. Free yourself from consciousness of the body, and you will be freed from lust. Thus, if you are attached to this ego which keeps you separate from Brahman, you will run after pleasure in the objects of the senses. And this is the cause of bondage to birth and death. Cravings. The more a man satisfies his cravings in the objective world, the more his cravings will increase. But if he controls them and ceases to gratify them, the seeds of craving will be destroyed. Therefore, let him gain self-control. When craving grows stronger, self-control is lost. When self-control is lost, craving grows stronger than ever. A man who lives thus will never escape the wheel of birth and death. Craving is intensified if we let our thoughts dwell upon sense objects and seek temporary satisfaction in the objective world. In order to break the chain of recurring birth and death, the spiritual seeker must burn both these causes of craving to ashes. Craving, which is nourished in these two ways, will bring bondage to the wheel of birth and death. But there is a way to destroy all three, this craving and both its causes. Under all circumstances, always, everywhere, and in all respects, you must look upon everything as Brahman and Brahman alone. Strengthen your will to know the reality, and these three will dissolve away. Cease to find fulfillment of your cravings in the objective world, and you will stop dwelling on sense objects. Stop dwelling on sense objects, and your craving will be destroyed. When all craving has disappeared, that is liberation. It is called liberation while living. As the thick darkness melts utterly away before the radiant glow of the rising sun, so the thirst for life in the ego is entirely removed when longing for knowledge of the reality becomes intense. When the Lord of Day ascends, darkness vanishes with its net of evil. So, when the absolute bliss is experienced, there is no more bondage, nor any trace of sorrow. Let this objective world vanish from your thoughts. Let your mind dwell in the reality, which is full of joy. No matter whether you are regarding external appearances or meditating within yourself, be intently absorbed in Brahman. That is how you must pass your time until the residue of your past karmas is worked out. Recollection. Let there be no negligence in your devotion to Brahman. Negligence in the practice of recollection is death. This has been declared by the seer Sanat Kumar, Brahma's son. For a spiritual seeker, there is no greater evil than negligence in recollection. From it arises delusion. From delusion arises the sense of ego. From ego comes bondage, and from bondage misery. A man may be learned, but if he is negligent in the practice of recollection, he will turn toward the lures of the senses. The evil tendencies of his mind will seduce him, as a wicked woman seduces her lover. When sedge is displaced on the surface of a pond, it closes in again at once. So Maya closes in even upon a wise man, if he ceases to practice recollection. If the mind turns aside from Brahman, its ideal, and becomes ever so slightly caught in the sensuality of objects, it will continue to go downward through negligence and recollection like a ball dropped upon a flight of stairs. If the mind is directed towards sense objects, it dwells upon the pleasures which are derived from them. Indulgence in such thoughts excites craving. Because of craving, a man runs to gratify his desire. Hence, to a man of spiritual discrimination, a knower of Brahman, there is no death but negligence in recollection. The man who is absorbed in recollection attains liberation. Therefore, make the greatest effort to remain absorbed in the Atman. Through negligence and recollection, a man is distracted from awareness of his divine nature. He who is thus distracted falls, and the fallen always come to ruin. It is very hard for them to rise again. Rejection of appearances. Cease therefore to dwell upon the sense objects. That is the root of all evil. He who has won liberation in this life is liberated also when he gives up the body. The Yajur Veda declares that a man is subject to fear as long as he sees the least difference between himself and Brahman. Whenever a man, even if he has discrimination, sees the least distinction between himself and the infinite Brahman, fear will arise in him. Such difference is seen only because of ignorance. Reason, sacred tradition, and hundreds of scriptural texts declare that the objective universe has no real existence. He who identifies himself with it encounters hosts upon hosts of sorrows. He who is devoted to contemplation of the reality becomes liberated and attains the eternal glory of the Atman. But he whose mind dwells upon the unreal will lose himself. The spiritual seeker must stop hunting after the unreal which causes bondage. He must stand firm in the vision of the Atman, remembering that this Atman is myself. Steadfast devotion to Brahman and meditation upon one's identity with Brahman bring joy and wipe out the immediate experience of suffering which is caused by ignorance. The pursuit of sense objects bears fruit in the increase of our evil tendencies, which grow worse and worse. We must know this by means of spiritual discrimination and avoid thinking about sense objects. Apply yourself constantly to meditation upon the Atman. Refuse to dwell upon sense objects, and peace will arise in your heart. When the heart is peaceful, the vision of the Atman comes. When the Atman has been directly realized, our bondage to this world is destroyed. Therefore, refusal to dwell upon sense objects is the path to liberation. If a man is learned, capable of discriminating between real and unreal, convinced of the authority of the scriptures, possessed of the vision of the Atman, and desirous of liberation, how can he cling like a child to what is unreal and able to cause his downfall? For him who is attached to the body and its pleasures, there can be no liberation. He who is liberated is free from attachment to the body and its pleasures. He who is asleep is not awake, and he who is awake is not asleep. These two states of consciousness are opposed to each other by their very natures. When a man knows the Atman and sees it inwardly and outwardly as the ground of all things animate or inanimate, he has indeed reached liberation. He rejects all appearances as unreal and is established in the vision of Atman, which is the absolute infinite being. To see that one Atman as the ground of all appearances is the way to deliverance from bondage. There is no higher knowledge than to know that the Atman is one and everywhere. A man realizes that the Atman is everywhere and in all things if he rejects appearances and devotes himself steadfastly to the Atman, the eternal being. But how can a man reject appearances if he lives identified with the body, if his mind is attached to sense objects, and if he pursues the fulfillment of his cravings? Only by strenuous effort can this rejection be accomplished. Practice spiritual discrimination and be passionately devoted to the Atman. Renounce those selfish rewards which are obtained through the performance of actions and duties. Give up seeking pleasure in sense objects. Desire nothing but possession of undying bliss. In the scriptures it is said, when a man who has heard the truth of Brahman from the lips of his teacher becomes calm, self-controlled, satisfied, patient, and deeply absorbed in contemplation, he realizes the Atman within his own heart and sees the Atman as all. For such a seeker, the above passage prescribes deep contemplation of the Atman in order that the Atman in all things may be realized. The rope and the snake. It is impossible even for the wise to destroy the ego at a single blow. It is too firmly rooted in human nature. It continues with its many cravings through innumerable births. The ego is completely destroyed only in those who have become enlightened through attainment of the highest transcendental consciousness. When a man's mind has become veiled in ignorance, the power of projection, whose nature is restlessness, causes him to identify himself with the ego. The ego seduces and distracts him with the desire which are its attributes. It is hard to overcome the power of projection until the veiling power of ignorance is completely destroyed. When a man can distinguish as clearly between the Atman and external appearances as between milk and water, then the veil of ignorance which covers the Atman will vanish naturally. When the mind is no longer distracted by the mirage of sense objects, every obstacle to realization of the Atman has undoubtedly been overcome. When a man becomes illumined by knowledge, there arises within him perfect discrimination, which clearly distinguishes the true being, the Atman, from the external appearances. Thus he is freed from the bonds of delusion created by Maya, and is no longer subject to death and rebirth in the world of change. The knowledge that we are Brahman is like a fire which altogether consumes the thick forest of ignorance. When a man has realized his oneness with Brahman, how can he harbor any seed of death and rebirth? When the vision of reality comes, the veil of ignorance is completely removed. As long as we perceive things falsely, our false perception distracts us and makes us miserable. When our false perception is corrected, misery ends also. For example, you see a rope and think it is a snake. As soon as you realize that the rope is a rope, your false perception of a snake ceases, and you are no longer distracted by the fear which it inspired. Therefore, the wise man who wishes to break his bondage must know the reality. Just as iron gives forth sparks when it is in contact with fire, so the mind appears to act and to perceive because of its contact with Brahman, which is consciousness itself. These powers of action and perception, which seem to belong to the mind, are unreal. They are as false as things seen in delusion, imagination, and dream. The modifications of Maya, ranging from the sense of ego down to the body and the sense objects, are all unreal. They are unreal because they change from moment to moment. The Atman never changes. The Atman is supreme, eternal, indivisible, pure consciousness, one without a second. It is the witness of the mind, intellect, and other faculties. It is distinct from the gross and the subtle. It is the real I. It is the inner being, the uttermost, everlasting joy. Thus the wise man discriminates between the real and the unreal. His unsealed vision perceives the real. He knows his own Atman to be pure, indivisible consciousness. He is set free from ignorance, misery, and the power of distraction. He enters directly into peace. When the vision of the Atman, the one without a second, is attained through Nirvikalpa Samadhi, then the knots of the heart's ignorance are loosely completed, and forever. You, I, this, such ideas of separateness originate in the impurity of the mind. But when the vision of the Atman, the supreme, the absolute, the one without a second, shines forth in Samadhi, then all sense of separateness vanishes, because the reality has been firmly apprehended.